Okay, so Rebecca Rushbrook, thank you for joining us today. Thank you and welcome to Townsville Grammar School Year 7 students.
Hello.
I've got some questions here for you. They're very excited about your poetry and talking to a poet. I've got some questions for you here. The first one I want to ask you is from Georgia, and she asks, why do you like poetry?
I like the way someone might write about something that is my experience and that I know, but will write about it in such a different way that I see that in completely differently to how I've ever seen it before. Or they might write about it and see it in the same way that I do, but put it in just such perfect words that always gives me a thrill. And I don't know, I love words. I love words, and I love what you can do with words when you put them together in just exactly the right way. It's really express exactly the exactness of something. I don't know how to describe that. I think poetry can really take you places and show you things that you may not ever be aware of without it.
So you're talking there about writing from personal experience, and Callum had a question about that. So he's asking, do you write your poems about personal experience? And if so, how do you choose which experiences to go with?
I do write most of my poems about personal experience. I have an ambition to start trying to write them about other things, but it all comes back to, I guess, my own experience of life. And I guess most of the time I don't really choose what I'm going to write about so much as I might have a feeling about something that is so very big that I need to write it down. The same as maybe if you have a problem, or if you have something that happened to you and you really want to tell your friends about it, sometimes for me, instead of telling my friends about it, I write a poem about it instead.
Caleb, Connor and Luke all wanted to know where you get your inspiration from, and Claire specifically wanted to know what your inspiration was with the poem Mine, which most of the students have read.
Probably I get a lot of inspiration from reading other people's poetry, and I find the more poetry that I read, the more poetry that I want to write, because it puts my mind into that way of thinking about the world. But with Mine in particular, I guess I was really inspired by all over Australia really at the moment there's mining companies that are wanting to mine under the ground for coal seam gas. They've done it a lot up there in Queensland, and they're starting to do it in the northern rivers where I live, and it's very unsafe for the environment. There's dangerous chemicals that can go into the water, it pollutes the air, it creates a lot of salt water waste that they don't know what to do with, and can potentially just really destroy an area. And my area that I live in is so beautiful, and we've been trying very hard to stop them from doing that here. And so I guess I had, like I was saying before, such a big feeling about that I really wanted to write about it. And then I guess with that poem as well, I wanted to compete in a competition that was at our local show, which that year had actually been sponsored by Metgasco, which was the big mining company. So I thought the only way I can do this is if I write something to say, this is how I feel about you. So that was why I wrote that poem.
Question from Ebony, Lachlan and Makoto. They wondered, how did you come up with the language for the poem?
I don't know that I did come up with the language for the poem. It just kind of came out of me, I guess. That's another thing that I think, if you want to write poetry, the more poetry that you read and the more poetry that you write, the closer and closer you get to finding your own language and your own voice. And I really feel like I've found that now. So that language that I write with is my language, and it's the way when I'm writing it, it naturally comes out of me.
How long does it take to write a poem? This question comes from Claire, Shirley, Emily, Hayley, Ryan, Nick, Matt, Nate, Roop, Tara, Lily and Amy. They all want to know how long it takes to write a poem. And then specifically, how long did it take to write mine? And that question's from Ben, Sam, Sebastian, Connor, Ben, Rhiannon, Leighton and Sydney.
Well, I guess it takes different times to write different poems. Some poems I can just write in a few hours. Mine took me a few weeks to write because I wasn't sure which direction I was going in with it. So yeah, I guess it depends. Some just come out blah, 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 and when I was younger and had lots of time, I always thought that I had to finish a poem. When I sat down to write it, I had to finish it or it would be lost and I'd never be able to finish it. But now I have a busy life and kids and it doesn't always work out that way. So now I've learnt to put my poems down and put them in the back of my mind and come back to them later. And so sometimes they might take a few days, or like, I think mine's the longest I've ever spent on a poem. That was maybe 3 weeks, I think it took to write that. So yeah, it just depends. When I was 12 or 13, I used to write my poems very quickly, and they would, maybe 10 minutes, maybe sometimes half an hour, an hour, and I don't know, you're so lucky because your brains are so much more elastic than older people's brains are. But I guess, I don't know, like I always feel like when you're writing the stuff that you really write without stopping yourself too much to think about it is always the best stuff. And but afterwards you can look at what you've got and just, I guess, read it out loud and think, does that sound right? Does any of that sound like it's a bit awkward and doesn't quite work? And then you can look at, could I say that a bit better? Or if any of your images that you've used, maybe you think, that's not quite right, I didn't quite get that right there, then you could go back and have a look at trying to do that again.
Who is mine for? That's a question from Ben, Rhiannon, Leighton and Sydney.
Well, I guess in a way it was for Met Gasco. I guess you guys would have worked out that I called it mine to have those two meanings of mine as in a CSG mine, and then also mine as in trying to say, no, you can't have this land is mine. And so I guess I wrote it for them in one way, but then obviously I wrote it to be a bit of a call to action for the people around here, because we've had some big protests and wins and losses, but we have been able to stop them going ahead with some mines here, and we needed to keep people fired up and keep people remembering why we're fighting. So I guess I wrote it for them as well.
When did you start writing poems and what inspired you? That's another question. Well, that's a question from Nakia.
I started writing poems when I was about 7, I think, and I guess I was, like I said before, I was inspired by reading poetry, and my mum used to read me. We didn't have the internet back then, so we had encyclopedias, and I had one of the encyclopedias came with a book of kids' poetry, and I really loved it. My mum used to read it to me. I remember it had a poem called "Something Waits to Bite My Toes When I Get Into Bed," or something like that really scared me. So then I wrote lots of scary poems after that. So I guess, and then I found out I can do this too, and that was pretty exciting. So then I kept on writing.
A question here from Caleb, Connor and Luke. How many poems have you written?
I have no idea. I have no idea. Not enough. I'm a bit lazy. And I get a bit... I really love writing and I really love having written a poem, but I can find it very hard as well. So sometimes I have a poem I want to write, but I put off starting it because I know when I start it, it will be a whole process of going, it's not working. So not enough, but I don't know, probably more than, I don't know, maybe 100, let's say 100.
Okay, sounds good. A century of poems. If someone wanted to be a poet like you, what is the best advice you could give them? That's from Zach.
I would say be a poet like yourself. But I'd say just read lots of poetry. Read lots and lots of poetry, and especially you'll find the poets who really speak to you. You know, there's lots of poetry that I love myself, but there are some poets who really speak to me, and they make me want to write. And I'd say write a lot, read a lot, and write a lot. And the more you do that, the more it will get inside you and into your mind and into the way that you think about words, and until eventually it will come out of you, and it will be so that, say in mine, we were driving out to Kyoga one day, and I was looking out at the paddocks, and I'd been reading a lot of Ted Hughes that morning, a poet that I really love, and I was looking out at the paddocks, and long paddocks of crops with this bright blue sky over them, and the line came into my head, long paddocks rippling in the sky's clear eye. And so I wrote that down straight away, and that found its way into my poem. But that doesn't happen if you don't keep your mind open to that by reading and writing a lot.
Question here from Sophie and Jasmine, because the students will next week be presenting an oral presentation of a poem, and they'll be reciting around a minute of that poem. What do you do for nerves before you are going on to perform? And can I just add, how do you remember all the words when you're performing as well?
Practice, I guess. At first I used to always take a piece of paper with me because I was sure I wouldn't remember, but I've done it enough now that I have trust in myself, although sometimes I also have the piece of paper stuck in my back pocket just in case. But I don't know, nerves, just, I don't know what I do. Practice, have a glass of water, shake my hands a lot, and you never get rid of being nervous, but it's like anything else. The more you practice doing it, the more you know that you can feel nervous, but overcome that. And you do find when you're performing, or I find that I will be very nervous, but once I'm there and I've made a connection with my audience, then the nerves really go away, because that you're in that connection between you and them, and it's not about you anymore, it's about what you're doing. So you just have to ride it out and know that you'll get to that bit eventually.
All right, well, thank you very much for talking to Year 7, and I'll just turn the recording off.